Hello, everyone. Yep, it is working. Very good. Hey, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And yes, I am going to be talking today about SEO, obviously, as well as how to do it in the cloud. Now, just a quick disclaimer, it will go fast. No worries, there will be notes after if you want to contact me. And very simple, this is not everything. This is just a touch of what can go wrong, among others. And some things I hope that you have not thought about that you will now have to check on Monday morning when you're back in the office. So a couple of things that we'll be aiming at is, of course, improving crawling for bots, as well as the indexing process, as well as speed for your website. Now, with that, we hope, of course, that we also improve your rankings, as well as, in the end, your turnout for sales. Now, here comes the big question. What's the problem, right? First of all, Google has publicly said that they approximate about 60% of the web is duplicate. That is a big, big number. And with that, we are unintentionally playing a tug of war with our own content. And that's a problem when we have cloud solutions. Now, you might be going like, what the hell is he talking about? Yeah, sure. It all starts with the URL. Now, everyone knows how a URL is scheduled, or build up. At least I'm hoping here that you guys do, because this is a technical SEO conference. You should know this part. But yeah, we have the basics, you know, like hello, we access a URL, we have an HTTP request, then we get a response, then we get status codes. Now, for SEO, the two most relevant status codes are, of course, the 200 and the 404. I'm putting the 410 with the 404 because Google kind of sees them as the same. Now, you might be asking about, how about the 301s, right? Aren't they? Well, actually, no. Yes and no. They're kind of our hack. They're our workaround. They're not really a URL, because it's like moving house and burning down the house where you were, yeah, where you previously lived. So it's kind of a hack to get to the new place. And it's important to keep that in mind, because every change to our URL we see as a change is actually a side move from one to the other. And it's important to keep in mind that URLs are immutable. So in other words, once you create them, the only other thing you can do is delete them. That's where that 404 status codes come in. Yeah? Now, how do we see URLs, or how should we see URLs? We should see URLs as database row IDs. So when you work with databases, I hope some of you kind of do, you may know you put a row in a database, you may change the data on that row, but the one field you never change is the ID. You create the ID, you delete the row, you delete the ID. That's it. URLs are similar. Yeah? That's an important concept that a lot of people don't think about. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is also, yeah, Google uses that ID in the URL inspection tool as the ID. That is why on top of Search Console, it's not anything else but the full URL, because that's the identifier. Yeah? Now, John Moo said this a few years ago very aptly. I must honestly say, he's not the first one to say it, not the last one to say it. The whole internet is based on this concept, on the World Wide Web at least. One URL per piece of content. A URL is an identifier for that piece of content. I really want you guys to keep that in the back of your mind going forward, because I come across too many SEOs that don't realize that. Yeah? And we see too much duplication because of that. Way too much duplication. And this impacts our content signals, which, if you look at all the updates that Google has pushed in the last few years, or actually the last decade plus, a lot of them are content quality related. So that comes back to this. Yeah? Now, let's talk about how to get this right, because this is the meat of the thing. This is what we really care for. So, one, very quickly, we need to know our host names. Now, of course, we can go to Google Search Console, add our domain as a domain property, and maybe see some of the host names that Google is crawling, some of the subdomains. Now, you may have done that, you may have not done that. I hope you have, because you may see subdomains there that you did not know that Google was crawling. Yeah? Bing, by the way, gives you that data to a certain extent as well in the Site Explorer, but you also want to look at your name server and double check that. See what's going on there. Do you have C names? Do you have A records? Do you have quadruple A records? Double check that. Look for duplication. Here, we want to, for example, look for staging and dev development situations. Here is Walmart with two simple staging subdomains. I'm not sure the IT team is happy that this is out, and the SEO team most definitely should not be happy that this is public and indexable. Yeah? Now, note that I said earlier, know your host name, but I did not say know your subdomains. Yeah? Very important distinction. Why? Because it's not about stuff on your domain only. With cloud solutions, we're actually now talking off domain as well. Yeah? And here, a simple example, two examples actually of two websites that have, the first one is a development website, and the other one is a staging website. Yeah? And the first one is a bank. Now, if we go to the original website of the bank, we can actually see that both the development and the original website are returning 200 status code. They're both indexed. Great. Do you think that's competing? Do you think it's safe for users to go to the WP Engine version and log in there? Yeah? See the issues here. Yeah? This is in the cloud. Now, it's not just for security, it's also for competing content. We want to limit that duplication part. Now, second, we also need to know which URLs bots are accessing on our website. Now, of course, we have crawl stats, and yes, we can see there a little bit, at least, Jory will talk about this more later, but we can see what type of bots are being accessed from Google and what the status codes are. The more interesting parts for me, though, is this particular one. This table, where we can see by file type. If we look at the first one, and for the ones in the back that can't see it, this is 87% of HTML files. The other one is 16. Yeah? The majority of the content that is indexable is on HTML, meaning that in this case, 51% on the other case is basically wasted crawl budget. That's something we want to be aware of. Now, the problem is that, oh yeah, and you can also use, of course, the other reports like this one. You might see some interesting data there. The problem is that this is just sample data. This is not the full picture. We do need the full picture to make better decisions. So then we need to go to our server logs. And we need to ask ourselves, are we recording the right data? Because very often we're not. And double check that with your IT team. Here's a simplified version of Apache common log file format. The user agent for condensing purposes I've taken off, but everything else should be there in principle. And we can see the slash and we can see a 200 status code, right? Now here we have the next line, or a few lines down, and we see again the slash, the root, and the 301. What's going on here? Why do we have two different status codes for the same slash, for the root, right? This can happen in our log files. Well, the reason is because one is the HTTPS on the root and the other one is the HTTP. But we did not record that distinction in our log file, so now we don't know. We also didn't know if this was maybe the www, yeah, versus the naked domain. So these are things that you need to record, and the standard log files do not record that. So make sure that you include the origin of every URL that you record in your log files. So in other words, the full absolute URL. You need to be able to reconstruct it. I don't care if you file it as a separate field or as the full absolute URL, but get the data. Because otherwise you don't have the data, as simple as that. You may think you have, but you don't. Also collect all of it. Because if you work in technical SEO, especially with cloud solutions, how about the CDN? How about the load balancer? Do you have those log files too? You need to. Because the user might actually never reach your server, and you still need that request. Same for Googlebot. Yeah? You need to get that data. And if you don't, or if you don't record all the relevant data, it's like playing Go, where half the board is invisible to you. Yeah? You're not going to be able to make good business decisions or SEO strategy decisions going forward. You have impartial data. Or partial data, I should actually say, not impartial, partial. Now, number 3, another problem I often see is blocking, bots with firewalls. I see a lot of sites that are aggressively, proactively blocking bots. And with that, yeah, you do need to double check that you're not accidentally blocking Googlebot. Because even these bot protection services that are being sold out there, they don't get it right. Yeah, not always. So you may be accidentally blocking Googlebot, which is something that Googlebot has also complained about. Now, some of that might show up here in this particular report saying like, hey, we can't reach your page because it's blocked. But it's not the only reason why it might pop up here. So keep in mind, it's not the final solution or the final answer, but it may give you an indication. Now, you might know that Google also publishes the IP addresses that they crawl from, right? And we can use those to whitelist. Great, whitelist. However, they are being updated regularly. So as a result, you need to make sure the IT team updates them regularly, otherwise, again, you're blocking. And you need to do it the moment that they actually update it. Yeah, that's another thing. But also, if you do any log parsing or comparison and analysis later on log files from a year ago, that list may be updated and IP addresses may have been removed, because that happens too. And so now, a log entry from a year ago, you may not be able to verify because the IP address isn't being used anymore, unless you have historic data for that IP address. So you can use tools like this. Now, the better approach when you do work with firewalls and an overly aggressive IT team on blocking bots, first allow the bots. Set a threshold. Once you have a certain threshold, verify if you should block the bot. Like this could be like 1,000 requests an hour or per week or whatever. Yeah, talk about what is reasonable, and at that point, block if needed. But take a reactive approach rather than a proactive approach. Yeah? Now, another topic. On the other side, now we had talked about bots, we also have the other side. Are you human? Yeah? And you may have seen these type of screens where like, hey, are you human? Google has complained about that too, because they also cause a problem for SEO. For example, they generate these infinite space of URLs on your domain, especially when you use services like Cloudflare, because in their situation, they basically take over your domain on nameserver level, and they just append it to the path, and you don't have control at that point. Now, also the responses that we're giving may not be actually content, but it's 200 status code. So again, something that Google has complained about. If you use Cloudflare services, make sure that you have this line on your robots.txt. Even if you do not use the challenge feature of like, are you a bot or not, just have it, because if one of your organization enables it, you want to have it there from day one. Yeah? So it's a simple line added if you use Cloudflare, as a simple example. And they also say so, please add this. So it's nothing too new, but a lot of people don't. If you use cloud storage, also a fun thing, to use cloud storage, we can, for example, use AWS S3 buckets. Here, the first one is a NASA page. If you look at the NASA page, the actual NASA page is also live on nasa.gov. And they're basically identical, well, they're basically duplicates. The thing is, it's NASA, they did not add a canonical. Yeah? Yes, that happens. Now, but that's not the only place. We also can find these storage buckets, for example, at Google. Yeah? It's not limit or digital spaces from DigitalOcean or whatever. There's a whole bunch of these type of buckets out there where we have duplicates of our content. Yeah? Load balancers is another example. Here, 2 examples of load balancers. Great, right? On googleusercontent.com. If you run containerized apps or serverless apps, you may have it also. For example, if you run in Google Cloud on Google Run, you may have a run.app subdomain. Yeah? And again, with all your stuff duplicated. If you outsource, here's a WP Engine example. I don't know if you guys can see it, but the top is basically pages not indexed, alternate page with proper canonical tag. And the bottom is the user declared is the root domain. What, however, is happening, the root domain is not being served as primary. Instead, the WP Engine subdomain is rendered as the primary, despite the root being mentioned also even in the sitemap. Yeah? CDNs, similar story, can happen there too. Here's Moz with most of their pages duplicated. Yes, it also happens to us as SEOs. Yeah? But they're not the only ones. Masterclass, similar story. Photodeck, similar story. If we look there, again, 200 status codes on both sides. If we also look at some of the bigger guys, Goldman Sachs, similar story, duplicated. Even there, we can find they have a canonical in place. Still, it's indexed. Meaning, canonicals don't always work. It's a suggestion. You can't rely on them. Yeah? And especially with this type of duplicate content issue, you really cannot. So keep that in mind. Now, one of those things also happened to me, obviously. Which is one of the reasons why I made this deck in the first place. This happened to me in the last few years a few times. I do develop a lot of apps and stuff like that. I containerize them normally. I launch them in the cloud. I put them on Google Run. I want often also things to run fast, so I toss a load balancer as well as use the Google CDN network. Now, with that, I know I have to put up a redirect straight off. Because if the host name has that run.app thing, I want it to redirect it to the main domain. Yeah? So I do that first. So, bam, I put a redirect on, I detect the host name. If it contains run.app, if it ends on that, then I redirect it to the main domain, leave the path intact. So it's basically a 300 deep redirect. And I do all the usual checks on my side. Everything is fine. Yeah? On my main domain, I check basic tools, all the tools you can think of, JetOctopus, Deepcrawl, Lumar, or OnCrawl, or whatever, you know, Screaming Frog. It all works fine. Of course, I had things to optimize, but overall, no alarm bells go off. And then I get this email. 500 error. And I get this really weird URL. And I'll blow it out a little bit. It's this one. Really weird. HP public AC01, AC01C, GCP, EU, D3, etc. I'm like, wait. Yeah, okay. So I look a little bit deeper. I see GCP, Google Cloud Platform reference. Then I see with someone else who has the same problem as me, but doesn't know it, there I also see a reference to open caching. So I now have to look into open caching, and yes, there's a protocol, open caching protocol, that distributes content to open CDNs, like with ISP, etc. So now I have to add another line to my redirects. Now, I know this works because after I do, I start getting email alerts that, yeah, the link has been removed, it's now a 301. Great, at least that worked. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm good, right? Let's look at the backlinks. Nope. Now I see there googleusercontent.com popping up in my backlinks in Google Search Console. So I'm like, what's going on? So, yeah, my content is duplicated again somewhere else on another subdomain. And I'm like, seriously? Yeah, so I have to add that now to my list. Now, think that's it? Nope. I know that is the IP, that was the load balancer. So if you look here, there's an IP address in reverse. So I go to the IP address, and yep, guess what? My website is also accessible there. So again, I have to add another line to my redirects. You know, now, then I'm like, okay, let's look into what's going on. So I go to the load balancer website and then dive into the sitemap. What do I find? The whole sitemap, the host names have been rewritten from my normal domain to, guess what? The load balancer host name. That's why Google's indexing it all. Yeah? So I'm like, seriously? No. So I try to fix it, and while I'm doing that, I can get this email from Yandex, who says, yeah, your canonical has changed to this weird appspot.com thing. I'm like, seriously? What is going on? Yeah, so it turns out, if you're on the same network, Google proxies, and especially some of those Russian ones, they can basically overtake the hostname part within the Google Cloud network, apparently. I don't know. But somehow, it resetted my canonicals now. So I'm not only, canonicals are off, the sitemaps are off, my content is being duplicated all over the place. I'm like, seriously, what's going on? So I haven't even talked about the fact that I also still have to add the www, by the way. So I try to basically look at, yes, I had to add that too. I basically look at what's the cost. So I launch my app in Python with Flash, with Workzorg, and I find out the URL for function tries to detect the hostname based on the environmental settings. Normally that works, but in cloud environments, it's a little bit trickier. And if you think this is just Python, no, this all applies to all those languages. And this is just a few of them. So this is not isolated. Yeah, it really depends on every single one what they fill out with. So yeah, I have this. I need to add the www as well. I'm like, wait, this is getting enough. I don't want to do exception after exception after exception. So I do the other way around. I have to now hard code my domain in my code to basically say, if it doesn't match that, it must be one of the other ones. So then redirect. Yeah? Now that's of course not great, but now I have to hard code domains, which goes a little bit against the whole Dockerized thing, but yeah, anyway. Some considerations if you have this type of problem as well is you want to prevent indexation of this duplicate content. Of course, redirect when you can, disallow with robots.txt if you can't. Be mindful that you should actually always have a robots.txt, because not everyone does. For example, here's, I'm just going to go ahead. If you want to test your robots.txt, check also with Google. But here's the key thing. So if you have a bucket, if you have your stuff in a bucket, and you do not have a robots.txt there, you may get something like a 4.3 or a 4.4 as for the robots.txt file in your subdomain bucket. Yeah, that means crawl everything. So if your site has a robots.txt but does not have that in the bucket, but is duplicated in the bucket, so the things that you have excluded on your domain are now fully crawlable from your bucket. So the things you don't want to, yeah? So be mindful. Keep in mind, robots.txt also needs to be in that bucket. Now also keep in mind inheritance, because not every bucket is on the subdomain. Meaning, in this case, it's on the subdirectory. So I've seen people trying to block it with robots.txt in the subdirectory, but that doesn't work. Yeah? You do need it on the root of the origin. And in that case, we're back to the root of the origin that Google controls, which is a 4.4. Crawl everything. Not great either, right? So be mindful there, which type of bucket you have. You also want to disable directory listings, because people can go in there. And there are these grey hat tools that are trying to basically expose every bucket that's out there. So not only search engines, it's also for security purposes. Disable these things. And utilize no index if all the other things fail. Yeah? But specifically for the bucket, of course, because you don't want to no index your website. Be mindful with canonicals there to not use it at the same time. Also, one other thing I don't ever almost see anyone do is add their buckets or the CDN thing, like CloudFront, etc., to Google Search Console. You can add it as a URL prefix and see what's going on there. Yeah? And set up alerts. Make sure you have a bunch of alerts that alert you on these things, because this is all off domain. So link alerts and 500 errors. Every 500 error that's generated on any of my websites, I get an email. That's how I found it initially. Yeah? So these things, yes, I get hundreds of emails, but that's a different problem. That is a problem I can solve, and I'd rather know about it than not know about it. You know what I mean? So this is one of those things. And it depends on your tech stack, what you can and cannot do, but by all means use all of these link detection things and whatever alert to basically see what you can do there. Now, just a quick bonus to add, because I do like also processing backends, and I think we can do better there. And Rick talked about it a little bit, but the key thing is we want to speed websites up. And for that reason, we want to make sure that our network is fast, so we can look at Search Console and we can see, for example, this is not stable. Yeah? This is not a stable connection. We also want to reduce latency, which is one of the reasons why I launch most of my apps in Google Cloud, because it's closer to Googlebot. Another reason to put it there. Yeah? Time to first byte, Rick talked about this morning, most definitely something. In case you're wondering, this is too slow. Yeah, this is better. So just FYI, if you are going serverless, also keep in mind that you want to look at the instances you're running, because starting up a new instance is a cold start. Even if you have a fast boot, it takes time. Yeah? And just as an example, I have here billing, like instance running, minimum instance running, and being built for that. And I turned that off and basically did on user request. It killed my time to first byte at the end there. Yeah? It just took more time to boot up all the time. So you always need to have one running, minimum, if not two. Yeah? Also make sure you use the latest security things like TLS, HTTPS, because that allow you to do some fun stuff with the network. I'm not going to go into detail of that. I'm sure that you guys can read the documentation. Be mindful, though, when you are using compressions, that you use also the same one as your CDN. Because I have seen, and I've also experienced even firsthand, issues where I was using Broadly, but the CDN couldn't support Broadly. They only used gzip, so now there was a mismatch in encoding. And that actually was causing rendering issues in the browser. Yeah? So be mindful there too. Server resources, we're talking here about CPU, RAM, and disk. This is something you really want to optimize as well, and go a little bit more than you need to. Here's an example where I basically went to the next level in the standard list, and it made a huge difference. Just making that switch. That's it, nothing more. Yeah? Make sure you have enough resources. Now, of course, all of this time to first byte, Rick talked about this morning, a lot of this stuff can improve the other Web Vitals too. But I also like to look at it from the other direction with Web Vitals, and to look at which websites are fast and how are their webs, basically based on the Web Vitals, which websites have good Web Vitals, and which technologies are they then using. Yeah? So the other way around. And the Crux team have a report. I heard from Rick this morning. They are betting, or they are working on a beta with a new interface, so new stuff coming up. But key thing here, When we look, for example, at server software, here's the operating systems. We can see Debian and FreeBSD doing a lot better. Ubuntu does not. Windows in the middle. No big surprise there. But yeah, this can be a consideration when you are considering changing your tech stack. Yeah? You can look at these things. Is this something that might be better for us? Same when it comes to the type of server, the HTTP server. It's all over the place, but a few jump out, and some also in the negative way. So maybe that's something to consider. Also, where you want to identify other bottlenecks, like for example, the distance to the user. Of course, which cloud provider do you use? Again, there's a whole bunch of them. If you take the top known ones here, we can see two really jump out. And neither one are AWS or Azure. Yeah? And yeah, that might be because of that. May also not be, might be other reasons. But it is a consideration. This is something to keep in mind when you're choosing the next time. Which language you program your website in. Python is most definitely not the fastest. It's the easiest, not the fastest. If you want faster, you may want to use another one. Yeah? And we can also see again which sites are faster we're using which language. Now this is of course assuming that this is all correctly detected. It's from a sample data set. Yeah? Keep that in mind. When we use in-memory or disk caching, it's also a technique that we can use in the backend really well. And here's an example of one of my websites where I implemented it from not to implementing both of them at the same time. And it made a huge difference. Yeah? Keep that in mind. When we're talking about cacheable resources, every page should be cacheable. One of the biggest mistakes that I see website owners do is use a CDN and then use a cache control of no store, which completely defeats the purpose of using a CDN. Yeah? Because every request has to still go to the origin. So make sure all your resources are cacheable. And if they're cacheable, that also means that you can do a lot more with SEO in the right way. So that's cool. So by all means, you can also even have your own edge server. It does not need to be a known CDN. If we look here, for example, it's all over the place. So let's take the top 3. And then we can see Varnish. Varnish, your own implementation, yeah, can be just as fast as any of those cloud solutions. Yeah? Keep that in mind. When we have a database, again, might matter. It might be a consideration to see which database is faster for you. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't stop there. We also need to look at the latency of our queries. For example, are we executing complex queries like joins, etc.? What type of data format do we have? How do we store the data? SQL, no SQL, you know, all of this kind of stuff. How many queries do we need to send? Here's a simple Hello World installation on WordPress. 18 queries to the database. Hello world, 18 queries, what the 2,000 plus hooks. What? Really? I can do a static site that's faster than that. Come on, why do we need this? Well, it's because of these type of things in the template. Most of this stuff is static. It never changes. It changes on day one and that's it. Why don't we make this global variables instead? Yeah, save all of those database queries. Simple things like that. When you have assets, a lot of people say like, yeah, just run them from a bucket. That has its advantages. We can use maybe a bucket, but I'm not ecstatic about it. I haven't seen many websites that actually perform well with that. And this also tells me nothing, pretty much, almost nothing gets about 40% here. So, with some exceptions at some point. I'm not really excited about that option. You need to test what works for you. Now, of course, you can use the server header server timing to record these things in the backend and send that along with the HTTP request, response basically, to the user and grab it with your analytics and basically grab this data and you can see what is really the bottleneck in the back of your backend. Now, where you do that and you fix those things, you will see your crawl requests go up because that's what Google wants to see as well. Yeah? They will crawl your website more. Now, quick takeaways, content quality issues. We have a lot of them, especially in the cloud. We need to audit this regularly and keep in mind, don't limit your audits to just the domain. Check outside that, especially when there are things happening like load balancers or CDNs and whatever. Tackle these issues then. Find a solution for it. Avoid the duplication and optimize the backend, please. Yeah? No one wants to be in this situation. So, my name is Fili, I'm an ex-Google engineer, and if you have any questions, I'll be around. And if you want a copy of the slide deck, you can either reach me on fili.com or searchbrothers.com. Thank you very much.